Welcome to Cybersecurity from Scratch, Technical Foundations, Episode 0, Series Overview. 10 years ago, when I started my master's degree in cybersecurity, I was looking for resources that could help me with earning my degree and launching my career. I was looking for things that covered the technical foundations for cybersecurity, starting at the ground level to understand what the basic technologies are and how they can be applied in a real-world context. Now, I found there's a lot of great materials out there that cover sort of the high-level principles, and there's a lot of things that focus on one specific technology, a particular form of testing or something like that. But there wasn't anything that I could find that really took a big comprehensive look at what is the technical domain for cybersecurity and what are the foundational technologies that you need to understand to sort of get a footing in that world. And as I continued into earning my OSCP, I found that remained true, and it has stayed true ever since, where there's lots of great private resources that cover this sort of thing. But in the publicly available space, there isn't something really systemic that sort of walks you through. Even a lot of the publicly available courses from some of the best universities in the world, they're excellent courses, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times they focus more on the theory than in the implementation. And so this is sort of trying to take a look at that technical foundation of the industry as it currently is, and giving new learners the ability to sort of get a leg up as either they're starting to prep for their OSCP or perhaps they're starting a degree or something like that. I'm hoping that this course will give the technical basics to apply some of that theory that is available in some of those other mediums. Generally speaking, the episodes will follow a particular recipe where there'll be a particular principle that we're looking to apply, and then we'll look at it from an offensive perspective of how someone can use that particular technology or principle or whatever to enact an attack or to execute testing, and then we'll look defensively at how we can defend ourselves against that particular vector. Now, for this course, I'm going to assume that the learner has at least a basic IT background, but I'm going to try to keep assumptions to the absolute minimum there. In this course, we're going to be talking about both the offense and the defense. And you might be asking yourself, if this course is intended for security professionals, then why is there so much emphasis on offensive techniques? Well, in short, the best way to ensure good defense is to know the offensive techniques that could be used against you and to actively test your controls. It's also really important to develop an adversarial mindset, because when you're looking at your system, you don't want to see it just from the perspective of the end user, but you want to see it from the perspective of someone who's going to be attacking it and trying to exploit it. And understanding what they might be thinking is really crucial for figuring out how to configure your own controls. A lot of times it's actually worth spending more time thinking about the offense and how something could be exploited than the defense, because sometimes the offensive vectors are much more complicated than the defensive ones. Sometimes the defensive controls are very simple. It's the testing of those controls which is actually much more complicated. Most of the key technologies that we're going to be talking about in this series fall into one of the 5 buckets here. The first of these are basic network concepts and security controls. Since networking allows all modern computers and most of the devices we carry to talk to each other, it's also the vehicle by which attacks are carried out, and so understanding the way that networks are put together and how security controls are applied to them is essential. We'll also dive into the weeds a bit for cryptography. Now, cryptography is obviously essential for modern secure operations, but it's also easy to kind of get lost in the math and forget to see the forest from the trees. So we're going to be taking a look at some of the back to basics of applications of cryptography and how security practitioners can use them in the real world. We're going to get familiar with the defensive controls available in our operating systems so that we understand what kind of defenses come out of the box and what other things we have to add in. We'll talk about some of the basic system services that we need to configure and administer. A system service is anything that a piece of software is serving up that might provide some sort of functionality. So for example, if you have an FTP server which is sharing files over the internet or over a local area network, that's a system service. And so we're going to be talking about FTP and a bunch of other services like it to understand what kind of vulnerabilities they have. We'll look at websites and website security, since in the modern day, an overwhelming percentage of the modern attack surface is over the web, and so often the first point of breach is over a website in a modern cyber attack. For someone interested in security testing, I'd like you to be able to, at the end of this course, conduct a basic penetration test on a non-hardened system. This will include performing a basic audit of system services, identifying problems in website construction, identifying improperly exposed information, identifying threatening system misconfigurations, and finally identifying software vulnerabilities and testing for exploit vulnerability. For security practitioners who are looking to either implement or operate security controls, we're looking for a couple key goals. One of these is to identify and correct problems in website construction and configuration, which often result in a successful attack. We want to be able to identify and configure common services in a way that minimizes risk. You're never going to get to a point where you have zero risk with any service that's running, but often you can configure things in a way that minimizes the chance of someone getting in. We need to be able to detect offensive attempts to breach our security and how we are going to respond. And we also generally need to develop a sense of vigilance where we understand the threat landscape and understand the mentality of the attacker enough and understand their objectives enough that we can apply that knowledge in a constructive way. Most of the examples that are going to be given will be illustrated with Kali Linux, which is available for free from Offensive Security's download page. I'd recommend using a virtual machine for this because it's very easy to mess up your machine in various different ways, and so having a magic reset button that can put that VM back to its baseline configuration is exceedingly useful. Often the examples that I'll be giving will use systems from the Hack the Box training platform. Their subscription is really useful because you can get access to all their historical boxes as well as the currently recent ones, if you'd like to follow along. They're not actually paying me to endorse that in any way. It's just probably the best $10 a month that I spend is on their system. So if you're interested in growing your skills in this space, honestly, Hack the Box is an absolutely wonderful platform. So if you want to follow along, please consider doing that. Our first episode will cover the basics of attack and defense. The first step is to understand the scope of the cybersecurity domain and draw bounding boxes around the problem we're trying to solve. We're going to introduce the key players and then dive into the anatomy of attack and defense and start to understand the waltz between attackers and defenders that goes on throughout an engagement.